Pretty much all React applications have parts in them that need to be styled dynamically, like we're doing it here with the inline styles. But as mentioned, inline styles have certain disadvantages, which I don't want to have here in this app. And therefore I'll switch back to using class names and using my standalone CSS files. Though, of course, as mentioned before, you will learn about some other styling options later in this section as well. But as you can already see here, you can of course also style elements conditionally when using extra CSS files. Typically achieved by adding a CSS class conditionally. Here it's just important to note that you should then use a ternary expression and add undefined as a class name if you don't want to have this conditional class applied. Because if you would use this double ampersand shortcut here, which technically would work, the result would be, if you reload the app, that you get a warning here in the console. Because in the end, you now added false as a class name, because with this trick here, if this condition here is not met, if it's false, you're now setting this here as a value for class name. And since this is a boolean, it's basically an invalid kind of value for class name, which is why we're getting this warning here. That's why when adding a class name conditionally, you should use this ternary expression approach for doing that. Now, of course, it's also possible that you maybe want to add a class dynamically to an element that also already has a class that should always be applied. Let's say here on this email label. There we could add class name. And let's say this label here should always have a label class. It's not really needed in this project, but of course it could absolutely be the case that such a label class is needed. And this class should always be applied, not just when a certain condition is met. But let's now say that in addition to this label class, we want to add the invalid class to this label here if an invalid value was entered into this input here. Because indeed, in the CSS file I provided to you, in the index CSS file, I got a rule that does change the color of the label if it has an invalid class. And we could also change this rule to look for a label class that then also has the invalid class in addition, so that we do indeed need this label class as well. Now with that, if I save this, you see that now this label is red. But of course now it's always red, because I'm always adding the invalid class. So to add this class conditionally and merge it with this class, which is always required, you can simply set the value here on class name dynamically and set it to a template literal by using backticks. So not single quotes, but this special backtick character you find on your keyboard. This is another way of creating strings in JavaScript, and when using this approach for creating strings, you can use a special JavaScript syntax. This $sign followed by opening and closing curly braces to inject dynamic values into that string. And this allows you to construct a string that includes both hard-coded values, like this label here, as well as dynamically injected values. And you can inject as many values as you need to construct a longer string. And therefore here we could then check if email not valid. And if that's the case, inject the invalid class and otherwise an empty string into this string here. So that this overall string is always a string that includes the word label, and then separated by a white space, either the word invalid, if this condition here is met, or nothing else. And therefore with that you'll see that if I save that and reload, by default the label has this grayish look here. But if I click sign in without entering a valid value, you see that it does get this invalid style. And that's therefore how you can merge such styles and how you can add some classes conditionally and other classes permanently. And of course, we can therefore also copy and paste this down here to the password label and add it there as well. So that now if you save this and you reload and click sign in without entering valid values in either of these two fields, both labels are now highlighted, as you can tell. And that's how you can apply styles dynamically, conditionally, with vanilla CSS.